Welcome to Merkaba Chakras, where we talk Buddhism in the fifth dimension.
Welcome to another podcast episode of Merkaba Chakras. I'm your host, Vaughn Galt. Today, we discuss addiction, drug and alcohol counseling and healing from a spiritual approach with Adrian Rooke. Aside from using the Narcotics Anonymous and Alcohol Anonymous 12-step techniques to address addiction, he also offers clients various healing arts such as Reiki, energy healing, Bards, Ovates, and Druids as a practitioner as well. So with that, Adrian, welcome to Merkaba Chakras.
Good evening, and nice to meet you, Vaughn. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for taking the invitation. I'm so excited. One of the things that I really loved about your website and your offerings as a addiction counselor is that you have a wide variety of spiritual approaches to help people. And I have been in Narcotics Anonymous with my best friends. I'm a normie, but my best friends growing up were not so fortunate to be a normie. Naturally, they ended up being addicts. And so I've been going through Narcotics Anonymous with them and familiar with the 12 Steps program and this whole world for over 21 years now. And one of the things that's very common, it's part of the 12 steps technique, is to find a spiritual approach to your higher self, a higher power, etc. And one of the things that some people do is they go to religion. Easy, it's already boxed in, it's already, been shaken out. But a majority of the people I've come across in 21 years of going through Narcotics Anonymous and the 12-step program with all the different things that they do, a majority of those people are very, very spiritual, and they have a very spiritual approach to a higher power, and it's not boxed into any specific type of religion. And so I really liked that was the approach that I resonated with your offerings. And then also that you do these services online as well as in person for people all over the world. And one of the things about that I liked about it is there is a lot of expats and people from different countries doing different jobs all over the world. And they may be going through some of this with their family members, and wherever they are in the world, whether they're in Asia or Australia or South America or wherever they are for their job, they need these services, and people like yourself are not in those areas. And so the online offering to find a addiction counselor who is highly spiritual as well, for anybody going through this anywhere in the world, whether the local market has these services or not, is going to be very, very highly sought after. So I wanted to open up that space to let everybody know that you don't have to be tied to what's in your local market and settle. Okay, so with that preface, um, before we dig into your wonderful work, can you tell everyone your story for how you even got into it?
How I got into therapy and into my own spiritual practice. Uh, it's a long story, but I'll say it down to as brief an offering as I possibly can. I, as a child growing up, I experienced a lot of the familiar behavioural patterns that we see in the world of recovery. A sense of difference, a sense of isolation, not connecting, acute embarrassment, um, fear, night terrors, all kinds of things that I personally experienced. I was also brought up in a family background with addiction. My father was a pub landlord, and he became a pub landlord in order to uh, to be able to supply himself with endless amounts of alcohol, really, which he consumed for many, many years. And unfortunately, he died young. He died in his early 50s. And he was a lovely man, but, you know, a lost soul, really. Growing up, I always tried. When I was a young child, I had an affiliation with nature. I also had a longing to connect to something spiritual. And I took myself off and joined an Orthodox church when I was 9, which was contrary to my family background. But I had that longing, and it was wonderful for a while. I felt very connected. I enjoyed the teachings. But after a couple of years, this particular organization, I started to grow in awareness, was incredibly judgmental about the whole rest of the world, that, you know, everybody else was going to hell, starting with the Catholics and then working their way down through pretty much everybody else. And then they listed anybody that was working in the pub trade, the licensing, which incorporated all of my family. You know, so I was kind of thinking that heaven was going to be a bit of a lonely place for me, because
a little boring,
boring, and everybody else was going somewhere else. So I started to see, for me, the flaws. And also, I had an experience years before when I was in the woods and I was led inside of a hawthorn copse of hawthorn trees. And I used to go there for solace and just listen and sit quietly. And I used to put my ear to the ground and I could hear the heartbeat of Mother Earth. And so for me, it was inherent in me from the beginning that, you know, if there was such a thing as a deity that was controlling and unfolding the universe, then it would be feminine, not masculine, because of that whole feministic birthing process of birthing life. And so quite without any training, I developed a concept of the goddess, which I took to one of our Bible studies, which went down like it's an English saying, went down like a lead balloon. So it wasn't very well received. And so I took myself out of that world. And then I got into my teenage years where, you know, the examples I had from my parenting experience were alcohol, drugs, other ways of coping with your feelings and emotions. And I have to say, I took to it like a duck to water. And my teenage years were spent in the pursuit of hedonism and, you know, that external means of gratification, and sorting out all of my issues. By the time I was 21, I had a major life-changing episode where I had massive heart failure, partly due to my lifestyle, partly due to medical negligence. But it meant I had to have open heart surgery. I died during the operation. I had an out-of-body experience where I watched the operation taking place, Von, and it, you know, at the time it seemed like my life had come to an end. Here I'm 21. I could die. Everything was about to change. And I look back now and I reflect on it as a gift from the universe, because it showed me, you know, the impermanence of this human experience, but also that consciousness is immortal, and that, you know, that there is this is part of a much bigger plan. And so I came out of that experience with that in mind. And,
so really quick question. So when you were going through this major medical procedure and you had that out of body experience where you got these insights, kind of like wake up calls to not get so stuck into your 3D self and your 3D world, that there's a greater, bigger picture. Like, was it just like an intuitive knowing that or was it like communicated to you through
it was
a being?
Yeah, it was a communication experience, because sometimes it's difficult to language something like that because it's so out of the box. But, you know, I knew I didn't have a body, and I was watching the operation taking place, I could actually relay back to the surgeons their conversations afterwards, which technically should be impossible from a medical perspective.
Right, because you're physically out.
Physically gone. My heart was out, my chest was open, my lungs were compressed, and my brain was being kept going by a dialysis machine.
Right.
So technically there should have been no, but what I felt was a connection to everything in that moment.
Yeah.
And it was, I didn't want to come back, because I have to say, up to that point, I hadn't done human very successfully. And
it's okay. Most of us don't do human very successfully anyways.
But the drink and the drugs, I mean, I fall into the category, and I know it's different for most people, but I took a drink, and there's a Chinese proverb, and it says, first the man took a drink, then the drink took a drink, then the drink took the man. In my case, 12-year-old dysfunctional boy took a drink, and the drink immediately took the boy. And the alcohol led on to other substances, but predominantly that was my dominating force. If I drank, I felt okay. If I took drugs, I felt okay. If I didn't take drugs or I didn't drink, I felt empty, frightened, confused. So in a way, the drugs became my higher power.
It became your coping mechanism.
It was my coping mechanism for everything. I was inherently shy. There were all kinds of life issues that perhaps if I hadn't have discovered drinking drugs, I would have grown through and developed coping strategies to deal with that. But I didn't, because of the alcohol. It felt like a quick way to access happiness. Carl Jung says, which is very interesting, he said that alcoholism and drug addiction is a low-grade spiritual quest. And and in some way that supports us in shortcutting some kind of spiritual experience. And I had in England, there's a big thing about hallucinogenic mushrooms and fungi, and I did that whole thing trying to connect with the experience I'd had when I was a little boy of listening to Mother Earth, and I wanted that.
Right. When you were a little boy, when you were listening to the earth, and you said that you heard a heartbeat, like what I mean, and that stuck with you the whole time. What was it that
stayed
stuck
with me my whole life? Well,
Okay.
it was the profundity of that connection, and just knowing that it's a funny thing for a 9-year-old boy to experience, but I had a knowing in that moment that I wasn't separate from this copse of trees. I wasn't separate from the soil I was led on. I was part of all of this.
You're part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and it was all conscious.
Right.
And and of course, through my drinking teenage years, I lost all of that. And then with the heart operation and having that out-of-body experience, when I came out the other side of that, I was told that I could only drink minimally, very, very minimally, like one drink a day, because of my heart and the medication. I ended up with metal heart valves, and that my life needed to be different. So that was the beginning of my questing. So I went to a spiritualist church, and I had some absolutely incredible experiences with a particular medium, who told me in no uncertain terms that I'd been saved because there was a purpose to my life, and my purpose was to work in the field of healing and to try and help heal others. But of course, I'm 22 by then, and still a young man, and not really knowing where to go. And for a while, I joined a Buddhist group, and I was chanting regularly, and that was lovely. And then I joined an American shamanistic, Native American based organization that was it was called the Deer Tribe, and we did sweat lodges, sweat lodges and workshops, and learned some other stuff. But with all of that stuff, for me, it felt, apart from the spiritualism, all the other things felt like they were coming from a different place, far away. It was a connection to something that was really profound and really beautiful, and I got a great deal of comfort from it. But it wasn't mine. It wasn't really of these lands, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Right.
And so it felt like I was borrowing. So it felt like I was at a party, and I was leaving the party, and I took a coat that looked like my coat, but it was, you know, a couple of sizes too small. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and then the problem was that because I didn't have a connection or an understanding of what addiction really was, and the powerlessness factor of addiction, having had a period of time of not drinking or using, I decided I was well enough to drink again.
So
And,
you thought you were a normie.
I thought I'd become a normie, so to speak. And, you know, I was very quickly proved to wrong. And you know, my behavior and my addiction quickly took over again, and pretty much dominated my 20s with brief periods where I tried to reclaim through transcendental meditation and other things, you know, that sense of ease and comfort that I got through drinking, but I knew wasn't sustainable. And so I was seeking that in the world of spirit, but then I still had that belief system, the insanity of step 2, that, you know, I'm all right now, I can have a drink, or I can smoke a joint, or I can do something else. And then, you know, what I know now that I didn't know then, was I triggered the phenomenon of craving and the mental obsession, and I was gone again. And
You're
so
relapsing.
that was my experience. And you know, throughout this process, you know, there were good times. I got married. I married a beautiful lady. I had a couple of lovely kids. But you know, it was always there, like a stalking horse. My addiction would trip me up, and I ran businesses. I kept myself going. I kept the family going. But my shadow was always there. The drink and the drugs were always there. And at any moments of vulnerability, it would pounce on me like a, you know, like some kind of panther in the night, you know. And then I'd be off again, and you know, and I still had that spiritual hunger, but I couldn't keep it together. The two don't mix really. Reaching any form of you know, connection that lasts for me, and I can only speak for me, and for many other people I've known, you try and seek it through hallucinogens, and it's a temporary escape and or a temporary connection contingent on continuing to take the said substance. And of course you need to take more and more and more in order to get the same effect, so you get caught in that spiral down.
Right. You know, the thing that I noticed about your story of kind of how you got into addiction and behavior specialists, from your experience of going through it is, and I've heard this with a lot of people dealing with addiction and try not to relapse when things are good or when things are bad, is many of the people that they grew up with did not, like your parents, did not teach them proper coping skills when things are not working well. So it's the automatic survival or guttural reaction. I gotta go get the drink. I need a drink. How many people have said when something's not going right, I need a drink? Or where's my, you know, whatever, where's my coping mechanism? I need to pacify myself somehow. And I think it's a cultural thing as well, that many cultures do not properly give young growing people proper coping skills when things don't work your way, which is not all that, which is very common. These are some tools that you can use to cope or deal or resolve these issues, but that is a very mature way of addressing it. And unfortunately, I have found through seeing so many people through the program come in and out, and people, succeed in the program for decades upon decades, is that they have to learn it for the first time because no one or their culture or their family or whatever this or their church, no one gave them proper coping skills. And so they resort to, in this case, their addictions, but people resort to other things as well, like porn addiction or shopping addiction or whatever the addiction is, because we just are not properly teaching good coping skills that people can use at trying times. That's one thing I noticed that you said about what brought you here. The other thing that I noticed also is that you kept on seeking, and this is common too. I've seen this as well in 21 years of going through Narcotics Anonymous with my best friends, is you kept on trying to seek a connection to your higher power, to Christ consciousness, to the consciousness of the oversoul in us and all things, what people would call God in many religions. But you kept on trying to seek that, and whether people who are dealing with addiction or not, or any kind of struggles, that is what they are trying to seek, whether they know it or not. So what brought you into Druids as the form of spirituality that got you that connection to that consciousness?
Well, I think it was Carl Jung said that inherent in every human being is a desire to have a connection with God or our creator.
Mm-hmm.
It may not have been, but that's been quite a profound saying in my life. I kind of shambled along into my early 30s, and by then I'd been introduced via Rehab to
Mm-hmm.
the fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. CA wasn't about Cocaine Anonymous in those days, although it's a very strong fellowship today.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been introduced, but I didn't have that willingness to jump ship and throw my lot in with this whole ideology. I still kept that sense of somehow or another, I'm going to find a way of sorting this out myself, until I reached, the proverbial rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It can be whatever it takes, really. Waking up one morning thinking I've had enough. It took me to wake up one morning and to be partially paralyzed on my kitchen floor and to think, I'm not going to beat this stuff. And I had a moment there where the initial steps of the 12-step program just unfolded for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember crying out to a higher power that I didn't understand then. I had no formulated concept of a higher power. I knew what I didn't want. I didn't know what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I just cried out, either let me stop drinking and using now or let me die, because I can't do this anymore.
Right.
And something shifted for me in that point. I got involved with the fellowships. At the time, I ran my own business, but I got involved with the fellowships. I didn't initially engage with the program, but there was a point in my recovery where I started to work the 12 steps properly under the guidance of somebody that knew what they were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
and had worked the program themselves. And as a process of that, several things started to open up for me. One, I knew I was in the wrong business and I needed to get out of that. I wanted to do something completely different. I didn't know what at that time. I just knew I didn't need to be in the retail trade.
Right.
And the other thing was, I went, my quest had never ended. And I put it out there through prayer and meditation that I wanted to connect with Druidry. I'd always had a thing ever since I was a small child of being fascinated, because once a year in the UK at solstice, we'd see all these white-robed people marching into Stonehenge,
Yeah.
and then they'd have their solstice ceremony, and it'd be on the news, and then that'd be it. They wouldn't be mentioned again. But it touched something in me. I also had experience of a local stone circle just outside of Bristol. My uncle owned a garage just opposite that. So I used to go and play amongst the stones, and I knew that they were special in some way. I didn't know how, but I knew they were special. So I put it out there that, you know, I was sober now. I'd been sober for maybe a couple of years, and I, you know, I was praying for some guidance and connection. And one of my customers gave me a magazine. It was a predictions magazine, an astrological magazine. And I probably, if I'm honest, I probably wouldn't have read it. Because, you know, I would have glanced at a couple of pages, and, you know, it wasn't my thing. You know, I'm not very much into, well, I am, but I didn't go deep into stars and star signs and so on. So I tossed it on my office table because I had another customer come in, and I went back to deal with this customer. When I came back, it had opened up on the table, and I homed in on this tiny little advert, and it was minute, and it said, "Are you interested in a revival of native British spirituality and/or Druidic practice? If so, contact P.O. Box 133 Lewis, East Sussex, blah 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 blah."
Yeah.
And that was the there was some people that had got together, and they felt that Druidry per se, as it was exclusive amongst this one kind of organization. And there was a need for the principles and the belief systems of Druidry to go into a bigger arena, i.e. the world. And so I joined this organization. I sent away. I was so excited. I knew it was one of those knowing moments that I found something really profound. And so when the first set of lessons arrived through the post and I read them, the first thing that really turned me on to it was there was a little message there, and it said, "If ever your guides, guardians, or your stars decide or decree that you should leave this path, then know that you do so with our love and blessing." And for me, that was kind of unique, because a lot of other things that I've been involved with, people got, you know, a little bit miffed if you left, or you said this isn't for me. But this was saying, come, you know, drink of this elixir, and if it works for you, beautiful. If it doesn't work for you, then beautiful as well. And that was about 27 years ago now, and I've been a member of that organization, that Druid group, ever since. It's expanded all over the world. Interestingly enough, there are quite a lot of Druids in America. You know, you know, and one of the lovely privileges I had at one time was because I became a tutor within the organization, and now I'm the press liaison officer. So I've had all kinds of different roles. But when I was tutoring, there was a big upsurge at one time in interest from American members of the prison fraternity. You know, the people that were incarcerated in various jails, that were entitled to express their spirituality, and they joined the correspondence course about Druidry. So I would tutor those guys. And, you know, that was a very interesting period of time for me to see that even, you know, some of these people were in solitary confinement, but they were still trying to better themselves and to grow and
make a connection.
To make that connection, even though they couldn't walk the land.
Right.
You know, and one guy I had to write to. I didn't have to. I wrote to the prison governor to ask if he would grant permission for this guy to have a cup full of soil in his cell when he was working with the element of earth. And the guy said, yeah. And this chap wrote to me about how wonderful it was, because it was the first time he felt real earth in several years. And that blew me away. And because, you know, sometimes we need to be reminded to be grateful. And it was pouring down with rain at the time. And I went out into my garden after I read this letter, and just sat on my garden lawn in the rain, and just led down on the earth and thought, I am blessed. I need never take this for granted. So,
Yes.
that was a beautiful moment.
Yeah, and yeah, there are so many people who are incarcerated who are trying to find that connection to source. And most of, I'm not gonna say all, but many of the world religions are always trying to look for a connection to source out there.
Yeah.
It's out there. So they spend much of the practitioners of many of the world's religions spend much of their life seeking out there when it's in here.
Inside. Yeah, it's an inside job, as we
It's
say.
an inside job, and that inside job changes the outer reality. So that's the thing I like about Druidism as well, is that it has a lot of kind of like universal spirituality, or in some people's would call it shamanism.
Yeah.
Just kind of a shamanism is just an indigenous approach to universal spirituality. So it's many of the world's spiritual traditions that are very earth conscious as well as source conscious share much of the same principles. And so if you if in the case of the person who's incarcerated, or in case of anybody who's not really finding connection with any specific religion, then spirituality of any form and Druidism is a viable option for them. And especially in the program, it's one of the steps is to find your higher power, whatever you think it is.
Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to increase my conscious contact with my higher power, praying only for knowledge of his or her will for me and the power to carry that out.
That's right. So as an addiction and behavior specialist, Adrian, is there a common childhood trauma that you see in many of your clients?
I do get a sense that, yes, of course, there's significant threads that can run through why an individual crosses over that dividing line between being able to manage their substance intake and then their substance intake starting to manage them. And that's the subtle difference. There's an invisible bridge that people cross. Right. And sometimes, I've known heavy drinkers, heavy drug users that have had a particular shock that have recoiled from that and maybe learned from it, and then they go on and they carry on with their lives, and maybe they might drink occasionally or whatever, but they don't seem to have really surrendered to the drugs and the alcohol running their lives. Those that do, invariably have had some kind of sense of never being. I think the main thread for me is the imposter syndrome seems to be quite big in addicts and alcoholics.
Yeah, and what is the imposter? Explain that for people who are not familiar with the imposter syndrome.
Well, imposter syndrome is always feeling that whatever you do is never good enough, and if people really knew the truth about you, then they would know that actually you're only acting as if, and you haven't got a clue what you're talking about. And irrespective of the fact that you're doing a really good job, it's all an act. And and also a sense of whatever you do achieve is never enough. So people have that never enough thing where, it's always going to be better over there. If I move from here to here, then I'll have a better life.
So they're always, is it common that you find that they're always looking in the future? At some point in the future, it's going to be enough, or at some point in the future, I'm going to do what I'm going to be happy at some point in the future. So they're never really, for most part, really present in the moment. Like right now we're talking and this is enough. I'm enjoying the present moment, having a great conversation. But many people are not even thinking about the current moment and what they're doing in that current moment. And, are they content with this present moment? And you just take life one moment at a time and be content in every moment. But that is a foreign concept.
That's the holy grail, isn't it? That's what most people are seeking, and particularly addicts. But I think for humanity per se really would fit that bill, because you know, I know plenty of people that aren't addicts that spend their time looking forward to their holidays and then
Yeah.
Christmas and then the new car and you know, that concept of living in the moment,
Yeah.
you know, it eludes so many people, and I think it is the core foundation of a lot of people's unhappiness. The 12-step program, and backed up by most forms of spirituality that I work with, really encourages us to, you know, take responsibility for today. You know, this is the only, 29th of March 2021 you're ever going to get. You might get lots of other marches, and with a bit of luck, you'll get quite a few more years, but you'll never get this day. So this day is unique and precious. So what you do with that is up to you. But I always like to think, for me, when I put my head on the pillow at night, I can say, well, today may have been tough, it may have been fantastic, but either way, I've given it my best shot.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I haven't treated it like disposable garbage, or, you know.
Yeah. And that and that is, you know, in this tech, the 12 steps to spirituality. I call it 12 steps to spirituality because once you get over your addiction, that's the addiction is the symptom that got you
Yeah,
to stop and assess and start working the steps so you can get to a healthier place where you see that all life is spiritual and you're an aspect of that ecosystem.
yeah, yeah,
So and you can, as an aspect of that ecosystem, you can um have harmony in your existence in that ecosystem, or you can, you know, be the rock that's holding up all of the good stuff coming to you. So, you know, at every moment is your choice. But that is one of the things I found, that many people do not currently have their consciousness exist in any present moment. They're always thinking about what next, what to do. Well, I want to do this. So they're never really present in their body in the present moment. And to be of higher dimensional consciousness is to be present, because when you're connecting to, in Buddhism, when you're connecting to the crystalline consciousness, or the light of source, when connecting to their higher power, that higher power exists in everything at the same time. It's never thinking about time. Time doesn't
yeah,
exist to it. Everything exists currently right now. So the only consciousness is to be present right now. Right now, are you enjoying what you're eating? Are you enjoying the conversation you're having? Are you enjoying the presence that is that, you know, we're communicating with, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, are you enjoying what you're doing? And if you're not, do something that you're going to enjoy doing. And that is the presence of the higher source, because that higher source has no time frames. It's
yeah,
not always looking about the next thing it's going to do, because
yeah,
time doesn't exist. It's right now.
yeah.
And so,
Eckhart Tolle describes that beautifully, doesn't he? When
mm,
he says, if you went to a place where there were no humans, and you saw an eagle on a tree, and you said to the eagle, you know, what time is it? The eagle would just be completely bemused and say, well, it's now, dude. it's
yeah,
it's now, you
yeah,
know. And yeah, and that's a hard concept, and it can, that can be a little bit like a helium balloon for all of us. You
mm,
know, we catch it and we hold it, and then it tries to float away again. You know, and yeah, but that's the core of my belief system is, you know, live in the day. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery. You
yeah.
know, so you know
Today's the
what,
present. That's why it's a
today's
gift.
the present, the precious present.
That's why it's a gift. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Okay, so I have another question for you. So we're getting into the concept of addictions, and you know, a lot of people think addictions or addicts is like alcohol and narcotics, and you know, all these other kind of addictions. But to be honest, many people are addicted to other things as well. So, and even like archaic belief systems that no longer serve them, they continue to we subscribe to it. So in terms of addictions, there are normies and then there are addicts. Now, I just came from a Narcotics Anonymous ladies retreat, which I do for the last 21 years now. And the positive trend that I noticed is that the attendees are getting younger and younger, which for me means that they are getting help earlier than later in their lives. So some of my childhood friends are addicts, but I ended up a normie. So the question for you is, why are some people more suspect to becoming addicts than others who have a natural stop loss like myself, like a normie like myself? Can you answer that question for people who don't understand that?
Well, it's $1 million question, Von, and if I could answer that articulately and succinctly with all the scientific evidence to back it up, I'd have a queue of people waiting outside of my therapy room from here to Chicago. But, you know, I mean, the truth is nobody really still fully understands the genetics behind addiction.
Right.
You know, a recent report I was reading suggested that there may be a protein, or there is, or seems to be a protein in the molecular structure of our atomic body that's different, and then has a predisposition for those individuals that have that molecular protein deficiency to become addicted to substances. You know, there's a mode of consensus that says we have to have had a trauma-based background in order to become an addict. You know, and there's some truth in that. Of course, there is. You know, there's an enhanced percentage of people that have experienced sexual abuse or some form of physical abuse as a child to want to anesthetize their life experiences through substance usage. But that doesn't always ring true, because I've worked with a twin who him and his brother had exactly the same life experiences. One became a flat out heroin addict, and the other one's virtually teetotal and managing his own life quite well. So
and they're twins.
And they're twins, so they
same
have
DNA.
exactly same DNA. So
right.
you know, I think, you know, again, we spoke about it being the kind of holy grail to find out why. I think Bill Wilson said in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe one day, you know, they, no, it wasn't. It was a guy called Travis Cousins in the UK that was sponsored by Sackville, who was sponsored by Bill Wilson. And he started a lot of rehabs and did a lot of stuff in the UK about addiction in the 50s. And he said, if they developed a pill to cure my addiction, my alcoholism, I'd want to take 2 because I'd want to feel better than better. And that kind of sums up in a bit of a flippant way that, you know, some people have that lack feeling. They want more, or it's never enough. It's never enough. It's never enough.
Never enough. Never enough. And that never enough is trying to fill that void of finding that connection to your higher power.
Well, yeah.
Is that what it is?
That's what we would say. That's what I would say. Yeah, it's a lack of connection to a sense of self, a sense of purpose, and what do I do with my life? Is it just some frivolous experience where I run around playing Space Invader games, or, you know, and that's the latest addiction now: telephones, gaming,
technology, tech
gambling,
addiction.
you know, massive, been massive, particularly during the lockdown. You know, the rates of people gambling in the UK gone through the roof. You know, drinking at home's gone through the roof. So, you know, we're dealing with what do we do with our time that makes us feel valuable, useful, connected, not just to a higher power, but to each other, with that sense of community and focus and
purpose.
Purpose, yeah.
Purpose.
One of the things that, you know, has come up for us in the in the pagan community per se, is that there's a lack of ritual and rites of passage. Nobody seems to say, I mean, our ancestors had, in all areas of the world, would have initiatory processes for kids, particularly young men, but women as well. Women have a natural initiatory process when they start to menstruate. And that seems to be, the period where they step from being, a girl stroke young adolescent.
Right. But there isn't one for men.
But there isn't one for men, and,
right.
and there used to be, and there would be rites of passage that would take place all the way through. So in the pagan world now, there's organizations that have sprung up, and it's called Boys to Men. So they take young men and they train them in how to be the best aspects of a man, not the worst, not abusive, not manipulative, not driven by triviality or sex or drugs or rock and roll, but they have a sense of they're part of something bigger, and they've crossed that threshold through initiation, through an experience, and then they're honored by the elder men for the young men they are, and given a set of tools, really. And the 12-step recovery program offers individuals a set of tools in how to manage their lives. The question
give them coping skills. Give them coping skills. So they've been
and that depends then on whether the individuals want to pick the tools up, those spiritual tools, those coping mechanisms, and use them, or whether they want to leave them to rust in the bag. And
it's a muscle. It's a muscle you have to use.
Of course you do. You have to work it. There's nothing. One thing I've learned over the years is that there's nothing for nothing in life. We all get proportionately out of our lives in direct correlation to what we're prepared to put into it.
Yeah, in the answer to that question that I notice is, and I think I've seen this in many cultures and many people that I talk to on the podcast, especially in the United States. Children are born and raised into the culture, and they are trained from early on to kind of hone this mentality that, okay, now you're out in the world and go fend for yourself, go survive. You have to go survive, and you have to go and compete, and you have to go and make something of yourself. And so it's very much kind of like I would call it an ego-centric perspective to your existence, to the whole. Okay. Whereas what you're talking about in terms of teaching young men and women from the Druid practice that you are already born into the whole, you're a part of the whole ecosystem. There's no competing, it's not very egocentric, it's very a holistic approach. And here are the tools that you have for existing in this ecosystem, and we're going to train you some skills that you can use to thrive in this ecosystem. So it's very much a kind of a holistic, all-encompassing way of living and existing peacefully and happily within the whole of this human experience with Earth, as compared to, okay, kids, you graduated, go out there and make something of yourself, go survive, which is the common mentality that most young people get born and raised into in many of the world's cultures. I would say religions as well, their school system. Much of the cultures teach young people to just, okay, you're of age, go thrive, go survive. And so then, of course, there's a little bit of that freak out for young people going, how do I do this? I haven't been taught how to do this. And now it's the great big world, and it's so overwhelming. And that's typically the mindset that a lot of young people come into the world from. So, we need to expand how we see the world, instead of this big bad scary thing, but as this thing that's already has a wonderful ecosystem, and we've always been a part of it, and we can coexist peacefully. So with that, what kind of coping skills can you suggest to people learning to deal with life traumas and struggles without relapsing back into their addictions or back into their chronic behaviors that are not supportive of a healthy lifestyle?
There's a lot in that question, Von.
I touch on the major ones to give people some nuggets to take home with them.
You know, I mean, again, it comes back to what are the best coping skills? Well, you know, keep it in the day, you know, manage your life in 24-hour day-type compartments. You can do anything for one day that is going to appall you if you have to do it for a lifetime. Explore your past. Don't be attached to it. There's a lovely Sioux Indian saying that I was taught many years ago, and it says, "Hold on tightly, let go lightly." And it, you know, and I think that's really profound, and it needs thinking through. But you know, we can be attached to the drama of our past, and of course, it needs to be honoured, recognised, but then seen for what it is, which is a past life experience, which we then draw into the here and now, attach a load of negative feelings to it, and feel the pain of 10, 20 years ago. Well, there are ways, and we don't have time to explain them now, but you know, ongoing techniques of recognizing our own individual divinity, and that the gods, as you said earlier on, they're not outside of us, they're inside of us.
Right.
So this is
our own divinity,
our own divinity, and you know that we are part of an unfolding universal consciousness that is indestructible. You know, and science is now catching up with spirituality and religion. I watched a podcast the other day where they're now able to recognize thoughts from a kind of a magnometer, which is attached above the head, has no connection to the physical body.
Non-local consciousness.
And can still recognize that thoughts and consciousness are pinging out into the universe from us all the time. And to start to see not just ourselves as being divine, but everyone else. And that, you know, you're an extension of me, and therefore, you know, what I do to you, I do to myself, which is an old concept, an old Buddhist concept, I believe. But, you know, these things make complete sense, you know, and if you start to live your life, also one of the underpinning main reasons that people appear to relapse after a period of abstinence is that they lose their gratitude. You know, they stop being grateful. You know,
and why is that? Why is that, Adrian? Is it because things are starting to work really good and they're so far removed from the suffering of living in addiction that they forget the gratitude?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, because we forget quite quickly, and the human mind has a predisposition to be able to dissect what it chooses to remember and to disseminate different bits of information to a point where, you know, we don't want to spend all of our time thinking about how awful it was. Well, I'll remember that time, you know, 20 years ago when, you know, I took a load of acid, had a few drinks, and had a great time and had a totally cosmic experience, man. And the addict mind, left to its own devices, will always gravitate to find something that will cause it agitation. And, you know, it will perpetually covet, you know, the unobtainable and crash upon the psyche, the waves of jealousy, envy, and despair. And I'm quoting a guy called Sandy Beach about that. He was a great American recovery speaker. So I mean, what keeps people clean and sober is not forgetting that you have a daily reprieve from your using, contingent on doing something to make your life valuable. So if you start to coast, or you start to get lazy, or you start to allow little seeds of envy and jealousy to float through, then that little gremlin on your shoulder, which is your addiction, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. All of a sudden, it's whispering in your ear.
Yeah.
You haven't had a drink for 10 years, dude. You'll be fine. Buy an expensive bottle of wine. As long as it's over $30, you'll be fine.
Right.
Bingo, you're gone. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. One of the things I always relate a little bit because of Buddhism podcast, I relate a little bit to Buddhism. One of the profound things that a lot of monks and nuns and people who are very familiar with different elements of advanced Buddhism that's very, very kind of baffling is when you have people who have it pretty good, and then they get bored, and then
Yeah.
they start kicking up the dirt in their life. And then it's almost like, don't forget the life lessons that you've already overcome.
Yeah.
Because the more that you get comfortable and enjoy the splendors of life, the further you are removed from those tough life lessons that got you there. And so we repeat the past because we literally forgot what it was like going through those tough life lessons. And so this is it's a chronic thing that's very common in many Buddhist temples that I grew up going to. Is you have people who, if they have it good, they're bored, or things are starting to look good on the other side, greener on the other side. If they don't have it good, they want to get out of it. If they've gotten out of it and it's been a while, they start it up again. They bring up their old habits. It's like, how many times do you have to learn the same hard life lessons to finally internalize it as muscle memory so you can get on to bigger and better and greater experiences? Because there's other experiences that you can create besides the suffering and the pain. That's like the basic entry level lessons. How many times do you have to learn elementary lessons? And that's one of the things that's constantly baffling to many people in the Buddhist tradition or in other traditions is there's all this work to help people get over the elementary life lessons, but then they they're they're stumped at what next higher level experience can they go, what next, how good can it get? So and maybe that's just maybe that's just the human experience, maybe.
Well,
Okay.
I think also within that concept, we're working on you're working on a story there, which is what we believe to be our only story, that actually we're working this through in this one lifetime, and who knows, the longer I'm
Yeah.
around, the more flexible I am to endless possibilities.
Right.
That we could be working through, a previous lifetime's experience, and
Yeah.
we may be sowing the seeds for what we do in the next lifetime.
That's
This,
yeah. And that's the concept of reincarnation in Buddhism very, very much, is that this is not for many people, this is not the first and last go around in the life experience in
yeah,
whatever form that we
yeah,
become, whether it's the earth
yeah,
experience or another planet, a dimension, whatever. They're all just different experiences, and they offer different insights and enjoyments, and also challenges as well. But the thing is that what we've found in meditations is, and also hypnosis, and about the same thing, is that people will have certain things that were unresolved in past lifetimes
mm,
that they would carry forth in this lifetime, and they already have things that they're working on in this lifetime, but now they have old baggage from past lifetimes and so it's almost like this is like they've have so much on their plate to work on this lifetime, that they have to learn and release the old life lessons from past lifetimes, address the ones that are in this lifetime, and then learn from all of that so they can create and build in the next lifetime, which happens to be all existing at the same time.
yeah,
So
yeah,
if the more spiritual you get, you have to get to a point where you connect to, like I said, consciousness, the main higher power in you, and that one is present currently right now. so you can heal right now all of the timelines that your being embodies by addressing all of the things, or heal it or transmute it. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. So a lot of this comes into family relationships as well. So you're a family therapist who teaches families how to cope with their lives while the addict in their family works the 12 steps towards recovery. Okay. And there is a common trait in that a lot of families enable the addict by constantly bailing them out, paying for everything, and just endless tears of sorrow for the pain of seeing their loved one go through the addiction. So, what typically results is that many addicts do not hit rock bottom. And you said earlier, everybody's bottom is different. Also, many addicts do die because of their addiction. So, what can you tell families in this situation? How can they let go of their addicted family members so that he or she can complete their journey and hit bottom so that they can start the process of recovery without taking down the whole family? Because how many addicts take down the whole network? Because, and it's sad. Instead of one person having an addiction problem, the whole family's been taken down because everybody allocated all their resources, energy to help this one person. And what did they do? That one person never hit the bottom because they couldn't let that person go. So what do you say about that? It's a very common situation.
And it's a very complex situation, and there's a myriad of different reasons why people end up in that drama, that drama dynamic, and they all end up in the victim triangle eventually, and victim, persecutor, rescuer, and the whole thing goes round and round and round. For me, when I worked up until I had my last heart episode, which was 6 years ago, I worked in quite a prestigious 12-step rehab, where I'd ended up as the head of the primary care counselling department, and I also specialised in running the family programs, and this was in the heyday really for recovery. I don't think it happens so much in the UK now. A lot of the funding's been pulled, very foolishly, as far as I'm concerned, because it was always, I think, worked out quite scientifically that for every dollar you spent on treatment, the state would end up saving upwards of $10. And the same was in the UK. You spend £1 on treatment, but in those days, what would happen is we'd have somebody who would work to being allocated into treatment. Once they got into treatment, there was also a pot of funding for their families,
Right.
because statistically, it had been identified that if you can get the families to go on their own individual healing journey, the chance of the addict of surviving their recovery experience and actually flourishing would go up considerably.
Yeah. And you actually touched on something that is very, very important. And I know even in the United States and many parts of the world, when it comes to addiction that affects members of of different families, they're still trying to understand this. But we have a program called Al-Anon, but it's for the families. But there is a surge of addiction rehab clinics and facilities in the United States, and they only focus on, for the most part, the addict to get them clean and get them through the rehab, and insurance will cover it. But oftentimes there's nothing for the family besides maybe a pamphlet. And so then they go back to the family that's enabling this, this. So it just, and so how many times do people come back to rehab over and over and over again because they get clean, they go back to the family, The enablers are still there. The codependents are still there. They haven't worked on any of it. It's not a full picture rehab. And what you're
No.
talking about is a full picture rehab for everyone.
It's a family healing event,
Mm-hmm.
and it needs, and you know, the best outcomes can be gained through having that holistic approach to the whole family.
Yeah.
Because you know what we would do, you know, or what I would do on the first day, I'd give everybody a piece of flip chart, and I'd write, you know, I'd ask them to project forward in 3 days' time when we're rounding up and you're all going home. What would you have liked to have achieved? And pretty much every one of them would have been, well, how I can better understand my addict, how I can better support my addict moving forward. And by the end of the 3 days, I'd ask them to run through their list, and each and every one of them, if I'd done my job properly, would be saying, well, my addicts got their chance of sorting themselves out now. You know, this is about me and my life, and now I'm going to manage my affairs. And I've given far too much time to little Sam or Julie or you know, whatever, and I'm going to dedicate this time now on my own life experience, because you know, codependency is advocating your own happiness, or you know, believing that you can only achieve happiness as a direct correlation of somebody else behaving in a certain way. And you know, in a way, that's a cop out. But you know, there's a process that goes through that, whereby you know, we would do a workshop on shame, we would do inherent shame, family shame, toxic shame. We do a workshop on codependency, so people understood codependency.
Big.
We do a workshop on fear, because fear is massive.
Oh God, the biggest fear is that they're going to die from their addiction.
Of course it is. And you've got children, I've got children.
Yeah.
You know, it's understandable. You don't want your children to die. And statistically, that's going to happen to some people.
Yeah.
You know, I actually, you know, had an experience once when I was running a family program, and you know, the message came through that, you know, one of the participants' children was in a coma, and you know, had overdosed and was in a coma, wasn't likely to come out of it.
Yeah.
But you know, what actually happened was that individual stayed with the program, obviously being informed regularly by other relatives, you know, that their son was in a coma, so there was nothing they could do about it, and they stayed and got the support of the group. But also, you know, it's not your fault. You know,
it's not your fault.
It's not your fault. The addict has choices, you know, and you have choices, and you can manage your life differently. So yeah.
I mean, that's powerful, and but it's called hard love, and it's called boundaries, and tough love, boundaries, and you know, and it sounds callous to people who don't understand the world of addiction or have it's new to them. It sounds callous. Like, how can you not help them? How can you not enable them? How can you, you know, all these other, how can you have such strong boundaries? It's your kid, it's your wife, it's your whatever, grandma, whatever, grandpa, whatever the deal is. But the thing is that addiction is going to take them down. It's just a matter of timing and when.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're just going to have to come straight and clean with the disease and stop sugarcoating and playing with kitty gloves.
I had a very interesting experience in one group that I ran, and one of the mums there came straight out with it and said that she used to go down to a very rough part of the local town and buy heroin every week for her daughter, and she was doing that so she could manage the amount that her daughter consumed, and her daughter wouldn't have to go to the lengths of prostitution or whatever in order to get her drugs. So, and another mother was absolutely horrified at this and had a real issue about, how can you do that? How can you do that? Shortly, we found out that the particular lady who was horrified at the actions of this other mother rocked up at her son's place every week with a massive food parcel, paid for all their electricity, all their gas, and their rent. And it
The
was
same
like,
thing. She's doing the same thing.
what's what? I'm doing that for my grandchildren, but it's exactly the same thing, because that allowed them to have what disposable cash they had to spend on heroin
Yeah,
or
it's the same thing. It's
alcohol or whatever.
enabling. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's enabling. It's codependency, and this goes to my next question for you too, because it's not just happening in family dynamics when it comes to somebody who enters the hard life lesson of addiction, and that it's not just the addict that needs the help, that it's also the whole family needs to go through a new way to live with this person. But this enabling codependency is not just run through family, it runs through society. So I live in the Seattle area, and we have a massive homeless and drug population. We have 15,000, it's probably grown more, of people living all along the freeways and so forth. And one of the things that they are allowed to do is there are programs where they will offer clean needles to the homeless population, of the ones that are not all homeless are drug addicts, by the way, but for the ones who are addicts, they will offer them clean needles so that they don't use dirty needles. And what results is these dirty needles that are used are on the streets, they're at the parks. My friend's mother went to a grocery store, and they were in the toilet paper roll when she was going to the bathroom. So they're everywhere. And instead of having X amount of these needles that they found on their own, they're provided by these organizations so that they have clean needles. Okay, and it just expounded the situation. The other thing in terms of this concept of codependency enabling behavior that also happens on a mass scale of society is we have this law in Seattle where if someone steals for petty crimes, you cannot enforce the law on them.
it's interesting.
Interesting. So, I mean, there's two arguments for it. It's just like the mother's arguing, oh, well, um, it wouldn't be so bad if we kind of gave these things to help them out, so it raise their bottom, etc. But you and I know it's codependency. We're just creating it to be a bigger, longer problem. And unfortunately, when it comes to the disease of addiction, it's not a pretty disease, and it's going to have a really, really negative bottom, whatever shape or form it's going to be. It's unsightly, it's horrible, but it is the process. So what do you say to cities to address addiction issues and also enforce the laws that would not enable this issue to get worse? Because it's gotten worse. All the enabling practices that Seattle has done has not helped it. It's gotten worse.
It's interesting because I try to walk a path of not being hugely moralistic about what states do and don't do, because I normally end up disappointed. And in the UK, all the funding's been ripped out from addiction treatment, and the funding, we used to have drug and alcohol action teams, DAP teams, that would fund the whole treatment process for the families, for the individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And then the money was taken away from those people and given to the medical profession, to doctors. And of course, if a doctor is given the dilemma between sending, Mrs. Smith into a care home for her Alzheimer's, and or sending little Johnny the crack addict into treatment, the popular vote goes with, the Alzheimer's little old lady and looking after, because there's still that stigma with drug addiction that they're criminals, thugs, and invariably should be treated accordingly. It's a dilemma. I don't have the answer, but as far as I know there was an experiment in Switzerland whereby they created a park where they gave needles to individual addicts to use, as long as they used in the parks, and they stayed in the park and it was safe and it was patrolled and they could have their experience, gouge out, do whatever they wanted to do. But you know, all of a sudden they have people coming for addicts coming from all over Europe to use those facilities, and then of course the crime rate went up disproportionately in the local area, as it did in Holland when they legalized certain substances.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't work. I honestly don't know.
Well, when you create a watering hole that wasn't there before,
people are going to use it. Of course they are.
That's right.
But you know, I don't know. I mean, it's an existential question, isn't it? In the sense that, you know, what do we do about drugs? You know, we know from our historic experience that some of the most prominent families in the United States of America earned their original fortunes on selling bootleg liquor. You know, and so, you know, alcohol was illegal for that period of time in the United States, and it, as a direct consequence, a lot of criminals became very rich and very wealthy. And if they had the intelligence to back that up, they put it into legitimate ways of spending their money. Right. And so and it didn't work. You know, ultimately, we are, as human beings, we have this supply and demand problem. Right. That if something is A, used, and B, becomes habitual, there will then be somebody that sees this as an opportunity to make money, and to either that or to pay for their own substance use, so they will supply it. Right. And you know, with all the vast investment that there's been worldwide to stop cocaine coming out of South America, is coming out now in quantities that have never been known before. I mean, in the UK, shipments being busted of hundreds of millions of pounds, and that's just what they catch. So we can safely say that that's probably about 1.5% of what comes our way. Right. So you know, what do? I don't know. Education. We start with education, of course. But as a society, there are a lot of very damaged people. As a worldwide society, there's injustice. There isn't a collective sharing of, you know, the wealth of being human. So there are always disenfranchised people, and disenfranchised people that have got emotional pain or trauma from the past, which we invariably find that people from poor backgrounds are going to experience a higher level of perhaps sexual abuse, physical abuse, right, poverty, starvation, a lack of. We live in an internet society where you're bombarded all the time that actually you're less than if you're not wearing the latest $250 trainers.
Egocentric.
So people are going to look for something to make them feel happy.
Right.
So it's a world problem, and it comes. You know, I think, you know, we were talking about consciousness earlier on. The next step for human consciousness has to be somewhere down the line where we not only start to look at all of us as having a right to a certain standard of living and life, and not one or two people at the top controlling everything, and also that we need to be. We're not going to be here in 100 years' time if we don't get some planetary consciousness going. Right. You know? A lot of people are disappointed with their lives now.
Yeah. You know? So you know, and the thing is that in a macro level, yes, all this stuff is really, but it at the end of the day, it comes down to you, and it comes down to the consciousness of every single person. So every single person has their journey to get to consciousness, to get to a connection to a higher self or a higher power, whatever you want to call it, the crystalline consciousness, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it, your Buddha nature, whatever. Every single person has to get to that part in their consciousness where they stop thinking in elementary terms. The consciousness of many people are very elementary.
Mm.
in terms of consciousness and maturity, the way that they see themselves in the world and each other, the way that they see their place in the greater ecosystem with Earth and with the universe and with consciousness is very elementary. It's very basic, childish, infant consciousness. We have not even reached our young adulthood.
Mm.
So, and so these little things are easy to pique the interest of children. And our consciousness as a humanity is very much still children. So of course, these little things, the shiny is going to easily pull us,
Mm.
you know, and that's really where I mean, I see it, and that is the conversation in Buddhism that has been going on for a very long time is at some point, humanity is going to need to grow up in their level of consciousness, and it begins with themselves. It begins with that connection to the greater being, and creating and existing within the ecosystem as an adult. So all these little games no longer attract your attention, time, and effort. You're into bigger and better things. So speaking of bigger and better things, you know, what what got you to learning Reiki energy healing to offer to clients? Because you don't just offer spiritual approach to wellness and living addiction free through the Druids, but you also offer Reiki energy healing. Can you tell me some of your profound cases when you use that?
Well, interestingly enough, I did an online talk with a lady earlier on, and actually she doesn't have a computer, so it was an audio
Oh,
conversation.
okay.
And I spoke with her last week, and she's got issues. She's isolated. She's feeling got family issues, got resentments towards behaviors within her family. So she's caught, locked away, being non-productive, and so on. So I spoke to her for the first time last week, and I spoke about the responsibility that we all have as human beings for making our own lives work, and we could sit around till the end of eternity waiting for divine providence to suddenly sort everything out for us.
Out there, looking out there.
Yeah, yeah, but if you don't start to take the action, then you're not going to get the rewards that you're seeking. So we
Right.
went through a little process last week about me sending her some absent healing, some Reiki through the airwaves, and her part of the deal was, because I had a little ritual, a little candle, you know, splashed around some special water, you know, incense, etc. And then I sat in a little circle and sent her some individual healing. Her part was to get out of the house and go for a walk every day.
Yeah,
You
get
know,
into nature.
and to go and find some trees that she could sit by and
Right.
connect with some energy of the earth. And she did that, and you know, and it was really interesting because you never, you know, you do what you do and you hope for the best. But you know, she said, I don't know what you did last week, but you know, I felt so much better.
Yeah.
And you know, things are changing. We're in the springtime here, so
Yeah.
that was just the right time for her to start to get out, recognize the bigger picture, identify some flowers and fauna along her route,
Right.
and to do something else. But you know, I come from a multifaceted perspective. When I came into recovery myself, I was in a job I hated. I've already said that earlier on. And what I'd always wanted to do for me was I'd always been interested in, you know, alchemy and mixing oils. And, you know, I do think for me now, the most divine form of alchemy is a ruined and non-productive life transformed into a productive, happy life.
Yeah.
But, you know, I got into aromatherapy. And so I went to college and I trained as an aromatherapist and a masseur. And for a while I did that. And that was how I got into psychotherapy and therapy, because what I found was when I was doing massage, I was very lucky. The universe works in mysterious ways, because, you know, I'd say 90% of the people that did the aromatherapy diploma with me never made a living out of it. You know, there's not that many people in the UK that want to spend their available cash on that kind of a therapy. But I was lucky. I knew somebody that had a retreat center, and I just became their aromatherapist. So that was wonderful, and I had a lot of clients until my wrists packed up in the end. But you know, I found a lot of people with touch, connection, and a listening ear, all kinds of stuff came up for them. That they wanted to start. Some people cried, some people, you know, became very sad, and they just wanted to know if I could give them permission to hold their stuff and to help them, you know, let go of it or process it. And I wasn't trained. I didn't have the qualifications for that. So I then went back to Bristol University and did my counselling journey, and you know, that involved group work and other things. And because of my own recovery experience, again, prompted, I think I was pushed all the way by an intelligence outside of myself, that supported me in all of this. Call it angels, call it what you want. But you know, the only place that I could get a placement to fulfill the criteria of my degree was in a drop-in center for alcohol and drug addiction. So there was a natural process of working there, doing my studying, but also I had my own experience, which I hasten to add. I was in an environment where you weren't allowed to self-disclose. So you couldn't say you were an addict in recovery yourself. You had to just not do that, which I find a little bit non-productive, really. You know, if you can get that balance right, because it's not about you, it's about the client. If you have experience that you can share that is relevant in supporting that individual making some changes, why wouldn't you use it? But anyway, so I was there for a while, got my qualifications, and this is quite weird, because a guy that I was sponsoring in the recovery program, 12-step recovery program by then, asked me if I wanted to come to his rehab that he'd been in, had an opening day. And he said, come on down, they do great food and blah, blah. So we had a day out in Weston-super-Mare down on the coast in Bristol. And I went with him, and I had a very bizarre experience, because as I stepped through this great big doorway going into this rehab, I saw fleetingly for a few seconds myself walking down the corridor with a suit on and a briefcase.
You saw your parallel self in another existence,
or my future self, because that became.
But was it a young? Oh, that
became
your reality.
Yeah,
That's
it was
hilarious.
my future self, and I mentioned this to my sponsee as I said, you know, I had a bizarre experience, and he said, well, I don't know why you don't work down there. You know, you probably talk more sense than most of them, and that was it. And then I eventually I applied for a job down there, and I didn't get it, which was interesting. And I contacted the company and said, look, can I, because I hadn't finished my qualifications at that time. I said, can I keep updating you with my qualifications as I get them? Because I would like to work at your establishment. And the guy said, well, no, it's not worth it, because we don't do that. We just advertise, and those that apply, then we'll assess you. But I did. I sent through a couple of my qualifications. I thought, well, I'm going to do it anyway. But then I had a job application come through the post that I thought was sent by these people, and I filled it out, got the job, and the rest history. And I was talking to my line manager afterwards, and I said, see, they did pay me to keep updating you, because you sent me out that job application. He said, no. He said, we wouldn't have done that. He said, we threw all your extra stuff away because we don't keep extra paperwork. And if you hadn't have applied for the job, you wouldn't have received an application form. I said, I didn't apply for the job. I didn't even know there was one that came up. And so therein lies a mystery.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Synchronicity, when you're in the right place and you're
yeah,
doing the things you're supposed to be doing of yourself in this experience, the universe will set things up for you. Like, oh, he's ready for that. And so they will set things for you. And it's actually, it's like water. It moves very smoothly.
yeah.
You don't have to challenge it or or put a lot of, you know, push pull with it. It just happens very naturally. That it's funny that you had an experience where you as you were going through um you know, this phase in your life, that you saw your parallel self. It kind of got a little inkling.
Mm.
So I would call that being being fifth dimensional, because
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is because the concept being fifth dimensional awareness is a baseline for other higher levels of awareness, but the concept is being connection to the oversoul, the main creator. And we talked earlier that the main creator does not exist in any concept of time. It all exists now.
yeah.
So when you get into that connection with the current now moment and you're living the fullest in that now with the creator, you will also be privy to other things that's happening in your existence, and that happened to be another version of yourself in the near future, but
And
you're experiencing it
also,
now.
yeah, and I agree entirely with that. That's a really good, kind of synopsis
Hmm.
of but also I believe in magic. Druidry teaches you to believe in magic,
Hmm.
and magic, in a sense, is you know um, unexplained experiences that can be advantageous and creative for each and every individual, but they have to come by a willingness to A,
Hmm.
accept, and B,
Hmm.
believe. And then as you open one door, there's another two doors waiting the other side. And then you can open whichever one you choose. And there's a constant unfolding of what is important in life and what we can contribute, because
Right.
I think we all have to remember that Bill, I think it was Dr. Bob, one of the co-founders of the 12-step program, when he was giving his last address before he died, he said, if you take the 12 steps and everything in it and the 12 traditions and all the fellowships and all the rest of it, and you boil it all up, what have you got? You've
Hmm.
got love in service.
Hmm.
Love in service. And I
Hmm.
think that's what's missing in a lot of our society today is A, unconditional love for each other, and B, a willingness to be of service both to our communities, but to the greater unfolding of the human consciousness as we evolve into our next phase of, our experience within this universe.
Yeah. And you know, and that's beautifully said. And in Buddhism, love and service, or unconditional love for all is one, and service for all to help raise the consciousness is what they call the Bodhisattva
Mm, mm,
journey.
mm.
The Bodhisattva. You're not going to walk through the final doorway into nirvana and get re-immersed with the consciousness of the main creator, but you're going to stay behind and do another couple rounds of reincarnation to help people raise their consciousness. It's the service to the all, so we go through
Yeah,
together. But
yeah.
that's a great suggestion. So I have two more questions. One is, you do offer a lot of services through Skype and Zoom online for people all over the world. So what can people expect in their online session? Because you even do distant healing with Reiki, and you found success with that lady that you had discussed. But if somebody from another part of the world is going through this with themselves or a family member, and they really connect with you, what can they expect to get from a online session?
Well, first of all, they get my undivided attention, which, for a lot of people, just to be heard and to be acknowledged for their own journey is a powerful medium for change in itself.
Mm-hmm.
So many people feel invisible in this technological age that we live in, and to actually, be recognized for their own struggle and their own humanity, that's something that's quite powerful. And of course, what I do then do is I add on to that with exercises, work, various things to do. You know, we meet up, reconnect, you know, and explore the outcomes of
Right.
whatever tasks they've been set. And I do send, and I do believe that, you know, because you touched on something earlier on when you spoke about we have to, you know, retrain this muscle of ours. And I always work on the principle that, you know, that addiction and the behaviors associated with addiction are hardwired in our neural processes within the brain,
Right.
you know, deep in the synapses. So, you know, in order to change that, we have to change our outlook. And it can be simple things like people have to start to recognize who they are spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And it, you know, it's not a done deal. And because you did this 2 years ago or 6 months or even 10 minutes ago, doesn't mean to say that you can't stop that now. You can change. You can start to adopt something else. But, you know, you have to start to see yourself for who you are, which is we're spiritual warriors, all of us.
Right.
You know, and that doesn't mean to say we have to be violent. It means to say we need to connect with what can I do in the world that's useful. You know, I met a very wise guy one day many years ago, and he was a simple man. He was a plumber, and yet there was 600 people turned up for his funeral, and he would go around and give out cards to anybody, whether they're addicts or not. You know, and it said on there, if you see someone without a smile, give them one of yours. And then on the back was his telephone number. So he must have had endless telephone calls from people. So
Right.
so his gift to humanity was service, making people smile.
Yeah.
And he was a
So
funny man.
simple. It's simple.
So it's simple stuff. So
Yeah.
I mean, up until, you know, this last couple of years, you know, I would have said predominantly my practice is best served on a one-to-one, face-to-face basis. I've got a beautiful, very chilled little therapy room with lots of literature around the walls, which are thought-provoking and stimulating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I send some of that through the internet now, and I get people to read and to start to do something every day, you know, because we have to almost deconstruct our old ideology and
Right.
leave ourselves with an open horizon for change.
Right.
And
Right.
then it's like completely saying, well, that crop doesn't work anymore. It's drained the soil. But what we can do is we can completely strip that out, put a load of good, you know, holistic fertilizers into the soil and plant a new crop. And then you can grow something completely different. And that's a very kind of druidic ideology of working alongside of the natural world. And also in druidry, which what I find very useful, and I know a lot of other people do, and that's to break your year down as well as your day into manageable chunks. We
Right.
follow what we call the wheel of the year. So there's 8 festivals in a year, and there's always something, and each festival has been anthropomorphized to incorporate aspects of the human journey throughout the wheel of the year. So it's making your life manageable, reduce your expectations, look at what you got to be grateful for, and change. You know,
Yeah.
if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Yes. And so you have a poem that you wanted to read to everybody to take away with them. So go ahead.
This is a poem about higher powers, and it was given to me many, many years ago by one of my clients. I'm not sure if he wrote it or not, because it was anonymous at the time. I think he possibly did. And we've been speaking about step 3 and connecting to, you know, a bigger picture than just our little small lives with all its difficulties and problems. And this is called Higher Power. I dreamt I met my higher power, and I listened while he talked. He reminded me of the difficult path through life that I have walked. We laughed and cried together as the memories tumbled by, and his heartache turned to anger. I asked the question, why? Why didn't you protect me when my body was abused? Why couldn't you have stopped me when I picked up and I used? That was your path in life, he said, the way it had to be. It made you strong and brave and wise and led you back to me. My precious child, I love you, and I never left your side. I was your heartbeat and your breath on the times you nearly died. I dreamt I met my higher power, and I listened, and he listened while I spoke. And I told him of my gratitude that my spirit had awoke.
That's a great poem. Well, to that the addict that wrote that poem, it has been shared with the world. So thank you for sharing with Adrian, and thank you, Adrian, for sharing with me. And yeah, that's a really great last message. And I don't know if you ever noticed this, but this is in this your third eye supposedly is right here, and you create a beautiful heart. You create when you're talking about when you talk about consciousness and raising consciousness, being grateful and all these different things, you furrow and it creates this beautiful heart right here. It's just funny. I just love it. So
Bless you. Yeah.
yeah. But that's a great last message to end with. So Adrian, thank you for adding many ancient healing modalities to help people address their addictions, and for offering your service as addiction and behavior counselor as well, and your unique spiritual approach to connection to our higher power with the Druids. So when people overcome their dark nights of the soul, quote quotes, through overcoming addiction, or being a family member trying to deal with it in their family, or in a society trying to deal with addiction issues that happen in their society, they often become highly spiritual to life, and they open to new ways to connect to consciousness of source. So for more information about Adrian Rooke's offerings, please visit his website, everybody. It's Rooke, that's Rooke, therapy.co.uk. Or you can just Google him, Adrian Rooke, and you'll find him as well. So with that, thank you kindly to our listeners for listening to another enlightening conversation. Until next time, blessings.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Merkaba Chakras, where we talk Buddhism in the fifth dimension. For more information about today's guest, please go to the show description. For more information about Vaughn's metaphysical work, please go to merkabachakras.com. The views expressed today are for entertainment purposes and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or replace any medical or legal advice. Don't forget to subscribe for more interviews about the fifth dimension. Until we meet again, blessings.